In this video, I'm going to show you how we can add ripples to the surface of our sand so it doesn't look so flat and boring. And how we're going to add those ripples is using a deformer called a displacer. Now, if we go into our deformer menu here and go all the way to the bottom, we're going to grab this displacer deformer here. And basically what the displacer does is deforms your geometry a certain height and strength amount. And there are many ways to actually drive that displacement. So if we go into the shading tab here, basically what you can do is load up an image, say a bump map that has grayscale values. And what the displacer is going to do is use those black and white grayscale values to either displace outwards or displace inwards, okay? With gray, 50% gray, meaning no displacement whatsoever. So an easy way for us to get some displacement and drive this displacement using grayscale values is just loading up a noise shader. Now, a noise shader, if I click on this button to go into the noise shader options, is basically like a turbulence displace, where it just generates a certain type of noise. And there's many types of noise here. And we can adjust the global scale here. But of course, this is not doing anything at all because our displacer is not a child or the same level in hierarchy as another object. And remember, those are the two ways that a deformer can affect another object. So if we want this displacer to displace our sand, we could just go ahead and maybe we'll think that, okay, well, we'll just make this a child of our spline. And you'll see we do have some displacement going on here. If we go to the object tab here and adjust this, you'll see that we're not really getting any type of result that we want. We are displacing this, but this looks nothing like sand ripples. So what's going on? Well, if you think about how the hierarchy is, a deformer is only going to affect the object that it is a child of. And so right now, it's only distorting the spline. And it's not distorting the actual result of the spline when it's lathed. So if I turn off the lathe object here, you can see that if I click off of that spline, you can see that displacement. We're basically just distorting the spline, and then the lathe object is just revolving that spline around, that distorted spline around, and creating this lathe geometry off that distorted spline. Now, we don't want to distort the spline. We actually want to distort the result of the lathed spline, okay? So for us to do that, we don't want to make the displacer a child of the spline, but a child of the lathe object. And now it's going to then distort the result of the lathed spline object, okay? So now we can go in here and let's bring the height down a little bit. And you're seeing we're getting a little bit of weird distortion going on here. And if I turn off my fishbowl here just to see a little bit better, and if I zoom in, let's actually check out what's going on here by bringing up our garage shading with lines. So remember, that's N and then B, and you'll see all the subdivisions of our lathe object here. Now, where the subdivisions are being driven is by this spline object. And you can see in the object tab of this spline, there are a lot of options. And if I turn off my lathe object, you can see that, sure, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 points that make up this spline. But to generate these smooth curves, there are intermediate points being created to create these nice curves and in turn create these subdivisions on this geometry. So what this is doing with this intermediate point set to adaptive is it's being driven by this angle threshold. What this is doing is actually controlling the threshold between 2 points. And if the angle between 2 points is beyond this angle threshold, it's going to create a subdivision. So the higher this gets, the less intermediate points we get. And the lower this number, the lower the threshold. And so every 1 degree, we are going to get a new subdivision. So the threshold between, say, this point right here and this point right here, if we actually turn off our displacer, is probably 0 degrees. It's a flat line, right? But between here and here, it's probably over 1 degree of an angle, so that's why there's this subdivision. But you can see that we're still not getting rid of our issue where we get this kind of big chunk of polygons here, and then small, 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 and a lot of really small subdivisions here as well. So this isn't really going to help us. So what we can do is actually choose a different method of creating those intermediate points that will in turn create the subdivisions on our lathe object. And if we want uniformly subdivided polygons, we'll choose, you guessed it, the uniform intermediate points. And you'll see this is driven by a single number. And you can see that as I crank this up, the subdivisions are evenly spaced throughout our object. And I accidentally hit the 3 key while I still had my cursor in this number option. So I'm just going to reset that to 30. Make sure that I actually click off of that area, and you can see all of those subdivisions, okay? So if I go back into the spline, maybe I don't need that many, maybe about 18 will suffice. And now I can turn back on our displacer and see what kind of subdivisions we got going on. This is still looking pretty chunky, so we can always crank this up again. Now, this is only controlling the subdivisions going in this direction, but what if we wanted to control the subdivisions around the radius here? Well, that's controlled by the actual lathe objects itself. And if we go to the subdivision option here, if we crank up this subdivision option here, you can see we're getting more subdivisions around the radius of our lathed object here, okay? So if I go to N and then A to get out of garage shading with lines, you can see that we have some pretty small noise driving this, and this is creating a kind of a chunky look. So what I'm going to do is go into our displacer, go into shading, go into the noise by clicking that button there, and let's just bring up the global scale here, okay, to, maybe let's just call this 650. And this is looking good, but we need to adjust the actual strength to get more displacement displaced in and outward on this geometry. And how we can do that is going back to the main options of our displacer. And how we can do that is by using this back button. And this will get us out of that noise shader and into the displacer options. If we go to the object tab, remember this is where the height is, how much push and pull there is. So you can see that we are adjusting that. And maybe we say, maybe I'm not liking this so much. What we can do is go back into shading, go into noise, and maybe we just adjust the random seed of that noise, okay? And maybe we're liking that. Go back in the object tab. Let's maybe bring this down a little bit. Let's just say we're liking that, okay? The problem is that we're getting displacement on the bottom. And if we turn on the fishbowl, this just looks really weird. Like we wouldn't have displacement on the bottom because all that sand would be resting smoothly at the bottom of our bowl. So what we want to do is make it so the displacement is only on like the top of our lathe object. Well, how can we do that? Well, if we go to our displacer, and if we go to this fields area, so fields have a multitude of uses, but for our instance, we're just going to be using fields to basically control the areas in which the deformation is occurring from our displacer object. So you can almost think of this as a fall-off shape for the displacer object, because right now it's just displacing all of our sand geometry. So basically what we can do is choose a type of field to help us control where that displacement's happening. So we could choose, say, a spherical field, and if I hit T for scale, you can see this bounding box here. If I scale this up, you'll see the displacement's only happening within the boundaries of this sphere. So what we can do is just continue to scale this up, and you'll notice that the spherical field's not going to help us too much because now you're seeing displacement on the bottom. So spherical field is not going to help us. So what we can do instead is just delete that field, go back to our field menu by pressing and holding on this menu button here, and instead let's choose a linear field. Now, the one thing you'll notice is that even though I deleted the spherical field from this list, the spherical field object is still in our object manager. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And let's just select this linear field and see what's going on. So I'm going to hit the E key to go to my move tool. And I'm going to make sure I'm in my model mode so I'm not selecting points or anything because I was in point mode. So if I wanted to select this object and move this back or forth along the X, you can see what is going on. The linear field is basically controlling like a ramp, like a 3D gradient ramp from this part of our field to this part. how that displace strength is being applied to our object. So you can see this arrow right here. What this means is that at this point, at this plane in 3D space, anything left of that plane is going to get 0% strength of this displacer. And then as we gradually go from left to right and go to this 3D plane, this point to the right is going to get 100% of that displacer strength, and you're going to get values from 0 to 100 in between. So I can even grab this point right here and control how this fall off is happening from 0 to 100% strength of this, but we don't want to actually control the strength from, say, left to right. We actually want to control it, if I click on this linear field, not in the X dimension, but the Y. So if I choose Y, let's shrink this down, let's just move this downwards. You can see now what's going on is everything from this point upwards is getting some form of displacement from 0 to 100%. So if I really shrink down the linear field, I can actually control the displacement to only occur from this part of the lathe object to this part of our lathe. Okay, and you can even rotate this and get, just the displacer on the left side here, but I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And this is looking pretty good, I would say, that now we have this nice displacement and distortion on the top. This is looking like sand, and then the bottom is nice and smooth. So if I turn off my fishbowl, this looks like this actually works. We got this like bumpy sand on top, smooth sand on the bottom, and we're controlling it all with this linear field. So play around with your displace object. You can always go back in here, adjust the seed, adjust the size. Again, this is the beautiful thing about Cinema 4D, is that we can procedurally create all of these effects and always have full control over them to adjust them as we please. So fields unlock a whole other level of control when working with deformers. Now, fields are a key feature in Cinema 4D that have a lot of powerful uses, and I'll be covering a little bit more about fields later on in the series, so keep on watching and I'll see you in the next video.